All right. Ooh, we got one more late arrival. Perfect. Welcome back, folks. We are beginning today a kind of two-part big story. We are picking up somewhat from where last week left off and are continuing in. So think of last week with the story of Tamar and Ammon and Absalom as kind of the prelude to what's going to happen this week. And we stopped kind of right when everything was getting going. And so we're just going to take this in a few parts. But like I did last week, just so it's front of our brains, I want us to go back to 1 Samuel chapter 12, verse 11, because this is once again, we are seeing the playing out of David's punishment for both his affair with Bathsheba and the killing of Uriah. So I'm not going to make you all flip there. I'm just going to read it real quick. This is from the prophet Nathan. Thus says the Lord, I will raise up trouble against you from within your own house. I will take your wives before your eyes, and I will give them to your neighbor. He shall lie with your wives in the sight of the very sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all of Israel and all of the sun. So last week we saw trouble rise up in his own house when his eldest son desired one of his daughters and decided to take what he thought was owed, whether or not anyone else thought it was a good idea. We saw Tamar be exiled to her brother's house, and Absalom eventually spend a few years and then taking revenge by killing his older brother. And so we start today with Absalom now exiled and David longing over his son Absalom, but also not doing anything about it. So that brings us to chapter 14, where our first character that we are run into once again is Joab. This is the first name that I wrote down because let's remember who Joab is. So, do any of you remember who this character is and like his spot in all of these
He's
stories?
David's nephew, isn't he?
Yes. So, what role does he have at court, though?
Oh, he's a general, isn't he? I thought, or something other in the
Hmm.
army. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's general and advisor.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
So he's one of our reoccurring characters that has kind of popped up a bunch of times. And so he has an idea because he it says that he perceives that the king's mind was on Absalom. So what do you all take that first phrase to mean? The king's mind was on Absalom.
Well, he must
Well,
have seen
Concerned about
something in David's demeanor or the way he acted or the way he talked that indicated that he was sort of feeling bad about Absalom for some reason. Now, it might be, maybe the king's just feeling his own guilt. Here he is. How did he raise these two boys? He didn't raise them one to kill the other one, so if
Mm-hmm.
that's enough, should be enough to make him feel bad. But I think the implication is that in some way David wants Absalom to be brought back to
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gary, you started to talk. What was your thoughts?
I was pretty much what, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that Larry covered it.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this one? So,
well, it does say that he kind of had gotten over Amnon.
mm-hmm.
him.
It,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he was the oldest, but oh well, he got killed. Now Absalom, and he does not spend as much time uh, with a mourning phrase and dirge like he will with Absalom. Amnon tends to be kind of a lower level person in David's eyes, and in the editor doesn't give David this long dirge over the loss of his son. He mourned him, but he didn't make a big deal about it.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes parents' grief can go in various different ways, and there's no wrong or right way. But it almost seems like with the eldest gone, like he all of a sudden has the grief of losing, not like David had already lost an infant that didn't survive, but now it's like his adult son is gone. And so that almost makes you want to hold on to your living children more, where it's like, wait, Absalom is the one that I have left, and he's also gone. So what would be restricted? The king is the king. And when little kids play royalty, there's often a sense that the king can do whatever they want. The queen can do whatever they want. Why hasn't David done anything? What would be constricting David's ability to do something about the fact that his son is exiled?
Well, there's a confliction, the fact that he's the one that killed his oldest son, his son. So it's it's a push and pull type. You like to have, he didn't want to lose two sons, but the one son was the cause of this whole thing. So, and he's the one that's still alive.
Well, my Bible uses the word heir. So it's David's heir.
Yeah, with the eldest son being gone, technically Absalom is the next in line for the throne. So this isn't just like any son. This is not just like any one of, I think he has 5 or 6 sons. I think he has 5 left. It's not like one of the lower ones is exiled. This is the next in line to the throne that is gone. So the heir is gone. There is no training happening of what it means to be king. But still there's a sense of like, yes, so he killed his brother. Unfortunately, not unusual for royalty. Why is David has the power to pardon. Why would he still not be doing that?
Maybe he wants to dissociate himself from this whole situation as much as possible. I don't, that's just a thought.
Yeah, so what would David has a reputation at this point, so why would violence with his sons be not good for David's PR?
Well, he didn't do it before. It just all happened. And so if he got involved, some people would like it, some people wouldn't, and could be more, how do we say it, divisive? I don't know.
That kind of gets at some of the things, or like one of the points that I was thinking about is while a king especially in this time, there is the divine right of kings. David is chosen by God to rule over this country. But it's not that David can do anything that he wants. He is still ruled by the court of public opinion. And that is going to be a major player in this story is the general populace for or against David? And when his son is a murderer, if he was to bring his murderer son to the court, what's the court of public opinion going to say about David? So knowing that David seems to be dwelling on Absalom, being upset about Absalom, but still not feeling powerful enough to bring this exiled son home, Joab hatches a plan. What, in your own words, tell me what Joab's plan is to get Absalom back home.
It's a crazy plan.
Yes, it is. It is.
I mean, you kind of you have a picture of an old woman coming and disguising herself so that she's not, and talking wisdom as if they ever listen to women anyway. I mean, that's strange.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of sounds like the Oracle at Delphi or something of that nature. He's
Mm-hmm.
hired a medium, a spokesperson for the gods, plural.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, the title that they give her is a wise woman. So she's not an oracle because those are technically banned by the Levitical law.
Okay.
People who divine in like a blood magic kind of way, those people are gone. So this is a wise woman.
Right. Oh, okay.
Um, I didn't have time to look up fully what is implied by wise woman, whether that means she is like a midwife, a healer. It implies that she has some kind of occupation other than just some woman.
She
Yeah.
has a sign on her door that says, come. It's like a psychic sign, but not a psychic sign. She does have a position, and how did he know who to go to?
Yeah.
And she's got a story.
Yeah,
Hmm.
she has a story,
She's
which,
got a story that's going to be appealing,
Right.
even though it's not hers.
Yeah, so who gives her the story? Because that's the other important part.
Joab, doesn't
Joab.
it?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Joab tells her exactly what to say. And so her story uh is it's intentionally supposed to mirror David's story. She talks about how, oh, I have these two sons. They were fighting. No one could break them apart. One of them killed the other one. And then the like crux of why she is coming forth is the um because of the culture at the time. Remember, there is no idea of an afterlife. This is still pre-afterlife. And so one of the things that is very important for them is that their family line continue. We see this in like Lot's daughters when Sodom and Gomorrah fall because they um, get their father drunk and have relations so that their line continues. We see this also with Noah. Um, and if you remember the widows that come to Moses saying, look, the men have died. Our line needs to continue. Can we inherit with the rest of the people? Inheritance and the family line continuing is a big deal. And so she comes forward saying, hey, if we do the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, they're going to kill my last remaining son, but that means my line will be snuffed out. And I don't want my line of people to discontinue. So that is the thinking here of the lineage. She doesn't want her lineage to be snuffed out of history. So what do you make of David's response to her? They kind of they don't talk directly at the matter per se. They kind of talk around it. So what is exactly David's answer to her? What's
Well,
David's solution?
well, he says, I'll take care of you if anybody objects to your bringing back the son or doing what you need to ensure the continuation of your lineage.
Hmm.
I'll take care of it.
So what is this? How does this function? Um, this is where I genuinely don't fully know because by Levitical law, there's a price to be paid for blood that is spilled.
Mm.
And so the assumption that seems to be embedded in here, which is part of her response, is my king, don't you be, if you do this, then you are guilty. Or like
Yes,
you take on my son's blood guilt if you defend him.
yes.
Seems to be the implication. And she's like, don't, king, don't be guilty. You're a representative of God. And David's response is, it's okay. I'm willing to do this. Like, I'm willing to protect you. I'm willing to take on the guilt.
Yeah.
So before we jump into the next part where she kind of confronts David about this response, what do you think of David's reaction to this situation where the king seemingly takes on responsibility for some random woman in some family feud that he has no attachment to, and he's just like, oh, don't worry, I'll protect you.
Yeah.
What does that say about David and the way he is ruling? Or what are some of the, let's unpack David's psychology there. What's going through his mind?
Yeah. You'd wonder why didn't he say, who let her in? You know, with this funny story, you know, what?
Mhm. So this is part of ancient practices. That's a great question of like, why is this woman allowed to approach the throne? We get a little bit of a view of this back in Exodus with Moses. If you remember, just after they left the Promised Land, they meet up with Moses' father-in-law, and Moses is spending all day listening to the people come forward and tell Moses their complaints.
Yeah.
And Moses' father-in-law says, dude, you're exhausted. You're doing this all day. You can't actually lead the people if you're just sitting listening to all these squabbles. Elect some people under you to take care of the cases. That is typical government structure for this time in this region. So David would spend time at court, and what that means is like he would have his people in the room, and theoretically there'd be people lower that would deal with like minor squabbles, but big squabbles would come to David, and so people would be allowed to approach the throne and like basically give a court case. And so David is not just king, but also king and judge. So this would be a standard court practice, is my assumption, that certain people would be allowed to approach the king with a problem and the king would decide.
So under current Levitical law, this is a big problem, right? Huh? If it's made it all its way to the king. Just the concept of what happened is a big problem.
Yeah, this is not quite with, I mean, because the United States is huge. This would be like a case rising to the state Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Where there would be some administration lower down to take care of the like, it's not going to city council deciding where the fence should be between these two people because they have a dispute of property lines. This sets precedent. So for precedent setting cases, I would assume they would go higher up. But that's neither here nor there. This is set before David because there's an inside man. This is Joab greasing the wheels. So that like Joab's just throwing this woman in front of David. She hasn't gone through the lower courts. So returning to the initial question, as David sitting as judge, what's going through his head? Yeah, Gary?
Well, my reaction when I read it was this was an opportunity to make David feel look compassionate, and it's again another one of those PR type of inserts. But that was just what I thought about it.
Yeah.
It was questionable, but he's just showing he really cared about the people, and this woman was suffering, and it could be resolved. She could have her son back.
Yeah, especially if you remember that it's not just she's approaching David in a closed room, like they would have court attendance. And so he is able to have the show of compassion in front of everyone. So there's an audience here listening with David that is implied because he came in this public setting. So David makes this public pronouncement of where he gets to look very generous. Why does it matter that a woman, and specifically a mother, approaches David in this setting? Remembering that he's in a room full of people watching and listening to David's every word.
Well, that makes it more significant that he's sensitive and supportive of a woman.
And women are necessary for the propagation of the lineage. You've got to have women.
So it's implied, or I believe by her dress and her speech, that it is implied that she is a widow. So one of the features of it is she no longer has if her son is killed, she no longer has a protectorate. And the sneaky thing here is because women are considered property, women are things to be protected, David gets to seem like he is protecting the little guys, the small people. He is providing her a social safety net. It's the equivalent of kissing a baby in modern politics. It's the I care about the people who are defenseless. So once again, that is very much in the like, this is good for politics. And Joab knows this. That's why he went to a woman and not a man. Because theoretically, a father could come talking about his son, but it doesn't pull those heartstrings in the same way. A father should rule over his household. A father should be the patriarch who has all of this under control. A mother, a woman, she is defenseless. And so it's a play to make David's guard come down. And so then she asks the second question, can I speak to the Lord basically, can I speak to you frankly? Can I add commentary on what you just said? Can I give some observations? Remembering that like this isn't just a one-on-one conversation. This is the woman to David to the entire courtroom of like aristocrats. So she is asking permission to speak directly to David. So David gives her permission, and then how does her tone change after she asks to talk about more than just her court case? What's her observation? What does she observe towards David in the second part of her argument?
Well, you're in the same situation.
Yeah, kind of.
You've got the son that killed his brother.
Does she take on more man-to-man talk? Kind of like, okay, let's just level up here and
So once again, though, I do think gender is actually doing a lot in this passage because of the power differential. So she, number one, has to ask to be blunt with him. But this critique is coming from a woman that says, thank you for the ruling, very much appreciate it. But also, if you gave this ruling to me, why, I'm sorry to be intrusive, but your family's in the same position. Why aren't you giving the same ruling to yourself?
Oh, yeah.
And so why does it matter that critique of David came from a woman and not a man? Why does that soften the blow?
Well, from a woman, it's just sort of an observation. If it came from a man, it might be more of a demand or more of a confrontation.
It might be too that she really represents the body of the people. She came, in without any authority and so forth, and so he may just feel that she maybe all Israel is concerned about this issue. That I can't seem to resolve with my son.
Yeah, I think those observations hits it square on the nose. Where if a man comes in this patriarchal culture with that kind of critique, it sounds confrontational. It sounds like it's questioning David's authority. It sounds like there's a political agenda. Because women don't have power in this culture,
Yeah.
it doesn't have that questioning of David's rule that a man would have in this culture. It comes off more of a, hey, the people have observed your distress. This has gotten around. People are talking. But it also, in that same motherly tone, sounds more like concern and less like critique.
Yeah.
But then the third time she is blunt with David, David's response is, this came from Joab, didn't it? Like David figures it out. Then it's like, wait, hold on here. I've been set up.
Mhm.
You aren't just talking. You've been talking to one of my advisors. And then she confesses that it's a ruse, that like this story came entirely from him. She kind of lets the cat out of the bag, that like there's no two sons. We set you up. So the why go through the theatrics of all of this? Why bring the woman? And it has to do with the people in the room. Why does it matter that they go through all of the work of David giving a ruling, of talking with this woman, of having the woman bring it forward? Why does that matter given that there's a room full of people listening and watching?
So when David does this and brings his murderer into his midst, they will say, oh, he did it from compassion and care, and he was moved, and he wants to do what's right.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Yeah, in a way, the uh, spokeswoman there is sort of presenting the big picture. What sort of overall implication does this act have? Whereas up to that point, it's been very narrow. Hey, this brother killed this brother. What do? We kill that brother. Then, we got to even things up. And now she's saying, no, wait a minute. You got to look at the implications beyond that.
So in a similar way that this is kind of working like similar, adjacent to our idea of like a Supreme Court case. By the time things make it to the state Supreme Court or the national Supreme Court, it's not just about the two plaintiffs often. Supreme Court cases are setting precedent. It is looking, Larry, as you said, at the big picture. And so, Gretchen, pulling in your thread, when given the bigger picture, when thinking about setting precedent, David chose compassion. David chose to take blame on himself to ensure that people are protected in a grand scheme of things. And so by making a ruling that is semi-objective, like David's not involved in this case and he made a ruling, he de facto made a ruling about his own family's court case. And so it's almost like, oh, since he made the precedent, it now applies to him, and he now has the authority to bring his son home. Where beforehand it looks like nepotism. It looks like David making an exception for his family. By going through the theatrical loopholes or the theatrical hoops to jump through, David can now bring Absalom home without public ridicule. He has the court of public opinion on his side because he was compassionate towards a widow, but it just so happened that it also applied to his family. So what do you think of this court? Like it took a bit to pull this one apart and think about why this long story. Why does it matter that they jump through all the hoops and deal with the court of public opinion here? Is it just good politics? Is it good optics?
Well, she ends up saying, "My Lord has wisdom, like the wisdom of the angel of God, to know all things that are on the earth."
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a powerful thing to say in this dilemma.
Yes. Remembering Hebrew language, this is one where I actually don't like that they chose angel.
Okay.
Angel and the word messenger are the same in Hebrew. Angels are messengers of God, and I think it is a little bit more reflected of the intonation. You have the words of a messenger of God.
Mm-hmm.
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 Okay. And then directly the king says to Joab, bring back the young man Absalom.
Mm-hmm.
So he's convinced.
Mm-hmm. Right? Except for a little bit of time, Absalom goes to his own house, but he's not allowed in the presence of the king. Eventually, Absalom gets frustrated that he can't be at court. He can't have his rightful place beside the king. Yes, he's home, but he's still kind of in exile. And he tries to summon Joab. Joab won't come. He summons Joab again. Joab still won't come. So he has the idea of, I'm going to set his field on fire.
Fire.
If I do arson, then the advisor to the king will eventually come to me. And he does. But this also says something about Absalom here, that now Absalom is determined enough to get what he wants that he is willing to resort to burning someone's field, which is their food. I'm willing to destroy your food in order to get you to talk to me. What kind of flavor what are some assumptions we can start making about Absalom at this point?
He wants that throne.
Mm-hmm.
And well, we won't get on to the rest of the story, but he's willing to work for it. He's willing to do what it takes to become the royal successor. And he's already started by killing Amnon, but he had an excuse for that because Amnon was so bad. But as we look at him, he continues to be, he's an aggressor. And, he, in a way, he takes on David by being there, but not quite being there, but deciding I'm going to get what I want. And
Why was Joab so reluctant to go see Absalom? I mean, you'd think, he was instrumental in getting Absalom back home. And Absalom says, hey, come talk to me. And he doesn't go.
So what do you all think? Why would Joab be reluctant?
because David was still in control. And Joab owed his allegiance to David. That's what I think. That's just my thought.
I don't know why Absalom couldn't go to see Joab. I think it shows his character when he fails twice, and then he takes the action of burning the field. It shows his character. This guy's a loose cannon.
So a little bit of politicking. So Absalom is allowed to come home, but at this point, Absalom is still the son who married the other son. Absalom is still the murderer. So this was at least my interpretation, that Joab did what he did not because he cared necessarily for Absalom, but because he saw that David was distressed about it. And David was willing to bring him home, but it shows that there's something still unresolved in David, that he was like, you can come home, but I'm still not ready to see you. I'm still not at the point where I want you in my presence. David still sounds like he's working through things. And so Joab is going to be on the king's side, like you all mentioned already. He is sworn allegiance to the king, whatever the king says goes. And it doesn't look good if Joab is going behind David's back. That said, Absalom would not have authority to go directly to David's advisors. It's not like he would not be welcome to just show up, because he's still in a pseudo exile state. Even though he's back home, people still aren't talking to him. He doesn't really have a role. He's just kind of existing, which is why he's anxious, because his status is at this point in jeopardy. He can be home all he wants, but if he's not at court, he has no claim to the throne. But it also, so he's not allowed to, he's most likely not allowed to approach Joab. Joab also won't talk to him, and so he feels like there's no way to change his situation. So he is willing to resort to burning stuff, which we're going to see how that kind of attitude plays out. But Joab says, fine, I'll bring you in front of the king. And this is David's official pardon and blessing of Absalom. He comes in front of the king kisses him. They are in a way reconciled at that point. But then Absalom, kind of having that streak of David, hatches a new plan. So Absalom's been apart from the royal court for a long time at this point. At the point that he's pardoned, though, he comes up with a new plan, and he gets himself some horses and a chariot and a bunch of men. And so the men are running out in front that are kind of clearing the street so he can ride his chariot safely. And so every morning he gets in his chariot, he has his men run in front of him, and he rides all prettily to the court. Makes a big show of it. But then he doesn't go inside the court. No, he's not with David. He's not standing next to David. He is not giving advice or wisdom to the king. He's not learning about what David does know. He stands at the gate. So remember how we talked about beforehand that people would go to David to decide on court cases. Absalom would be at the front doors. And he's just there talking to people. And he's like, oh, well, I hope you have all of your ducks in a row. I hope you have a good lawyer. I hope you have figured it all out, because, David doesn't hear all the cases. It's so sad. You might not get, I'm sorry to tell you this, you might not get justice in the courtroom. I am so sympathetic to your case. Oh, tell me what's going on. And he would kiss them, he would pat them on the back, and he would have so much sympathy for them. And he would just long that, if I was the one deciding on this case, I would definitely side for you. Yeah, you have a very good argument. Why is Absalom doing this? He's going through a lot of work, and he is doing a lot of personality work right now. So
campaigning.
He's building his base
to set himself up as the good guy. You notice too that he shakes their hand.
Yeah.
And he kisses them.
Yeah.
Really? Okay. I'm your buddy.
Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel.
I know. Right. Stole the hearts.
David.
So this is Absalom's PR campaign. He realizes he needs to rehabilitate his public image. He's not going to do it standing next to David. He will always be the murderer's son. So instead, he is going to talk with all of the constituents and be sympathetic and hear and listen and do all the handshaking, the kissing. The kissing is not like lip to lip romantic kissing. It's like the cheek kiss, greeting with a kiss. It's not romantic. It is still affectionate, but it shows a level of closeness. But he is willing to do this with all the people. My question is, does Absalom actually care?
He cares about himself.
He did this for 4 years. He certainly wants to be king.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 4 years is a long time to ride your chariot, shake a lot
Yes.
of hands, kiss a lot of
Right.
cheeks.
Mhm.
So what are we learning about Absalom through this process?
He's determined. He is committed to his own cause, and his cause is to become the heir.
Mhm.
And he knows how to do it.
Mhm.
He does what every good politician, give the people what they want.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I'm not against politicians, by the way, in general, but I know I've seen it happen. That's what you do. You give the people what they want. You're having a bad time getting your case heard? Well, let me take care of that for you.
Mhm.
And then when you tell them you send secret messengers and you say, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king at Hebron. So
Yep.
Huh?
after 4 years of hard work,
Mhm. So
Is
feels
there,
like
that was
he's
mhm.
won them over.
is there significance in the going back to Hebron where David started?
So Hebron is where Abraham is buried, I believe.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, that's right.
So Hebron is a very important city. Today it is a very contentious city
Yeah.
because of that holy significance. But that is where the tomb of Abraham is. It has been a political
Still is.
hotbed
Yep.
since the ancient world. And so while David is in Jerusalem, which is a fairly new Israelite city, it was a Canaanite city until David. Hebron has more like family religious ties. If you think about the national story of the original family that gave birth to the entire people, he is going in some ways like going back to his roots by going to Hebron. He is going to the seat of the patriarch and essentially claiming, this is now mine.
By the way, I have a piece of glassware from Hebron.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
That's
A
cool.
couple of pieces actually.
Mhm.
A Palestinian, well, anyway, you know what it's like to be in Hebron. It's
Yeah. One of the reasons, or just a quick aside, Hebron is one of the most politically contentious cities because uh because it's the burial site of Abraham, it is religiously important to both the Jewish tradition and the Islamic tradition. So Palestinians own the shops that are on the first level, and the Israeli settlers have bought out the second and third story. And there is constant fighting between the two groups because both want to be the dominant people where the patriarch that both religions stem from is buried. So it's one of those still a hotbed of political contention. It is, I believe, technically in the West Bank, but that hasn't stopped
mhm,
anything. So
right.
it's not actually a place where many tourists go because of that.
Oh,
But putting that aside, so Absalom has gained the court of public opinion. It sounds like he is being, in some ways, the classic politician. This is one of those moments of, well, I guess people don't change far too much because it is implied that Absalom is being disingenuous. He is saying what the people need to hear to gain power, to gain support. It is implied that he may be garnering sympathy, but he's likely talking out both sides of his mouth. But he does it enough that people are behind him, and so he goes off to Hebron. He takes one of David's advisors with him, and invites a bunch of guests that don't know he's about to try to overthrow David. So this is where we see that he is willing to be deceitful. He is willing to show a that he is willing to take the throne by force. So what are the similarities and where are the differences between what Absalom is doing and what David did? Because once again, David was a usurper to the throne, as Absalom is now a usurper to the throne. How is David cast in a different light than Absalom? David's rise to power is cast in a different light than Absalom's rise to power. So first, let's talk about the similarities. Where are the similarities between these two?
They're both cagey and strategic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're both great strategists.
And they both have their followers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Both won the court of public appeals while there was still a king on the throne. They both amassed a group underneath them.
They're both sort of pretty boys.
Yes. We get a lovely description of Absalom and how thick his hair is.
There
That
it
will
is.
come into play later. There is a reason why you get a description of how luscious his locks are.
You want that or a lute player?
Uh-huh.
Well, I kind of think of Absalom, though, there's not too much God in all of this. And with David and Saul, it's got a sense of God is working because Saul did something bad, and so Saul is on his way out. So it's okay for David to be going for the throne. God says so.
So to argue for the sake of argument, you could say that, well, David didn't sacrifice inappropriately, but he did kill and have an affair inappropriately. And so, well, David's not suited to be king because of what he did to Bathsheba and Uriah. So, you know what? David had it coming. This is his judgment.
Right.
So
Nathan told him.
But that said, the thing where I think you're spot on, Gretchen, is David had a much more robust conversation with God and relationship to the divine in his exile process. Where there was a lot of God talk, and I think it's a good observation where these two chapters are God is brought up when people are like, by the Lord God may you live, but there's no conversation with God when anyone is making decisions here. So that is different. So what are some other differences between these two where Absalom is different than David? So how did David respond when he had an opportunity to do away with his opponent? How did David respond?
Oh, no, I'd never do that. I'd never touch God's anointed. Never. Do we see Absalom having that kind of mercy, quote, mercy?
Have you seen it yet? Does Absalom really care about being God's anointed one?
I don't think so. That's long past.
He certainly hasn't made any appeal to God for anything particular. He's out proselytizing the people.
Avenging for his sister.
Yeah, for his sister, he's not asking for divine guidance.
So do we think, while the court of public opinion may say one thing, as our court of Bible study opinion, do we think Absalom will be a good king?
Oh, no. It's obvious he won't be. He's such a, but that is kind of an interesting point you bring, Chris, that there are similarities in the story, and yet Absalom doesn't get the right kind of PR in his story that David gets in his story. And David is more, attached to this divine succession. And that's an interesting.
But Absalom makes a lot of promises, a lot of proclamations to his constituents. I mean, he's dealing directly with with his people, and
Right.
he's going to get the throne on the basis of the power he's got through the people, not through God. I mean, he's not making any big appeals for divine guidance or help from that standpoint.
Right. So we see two different strategies where David constantly appealed to the divine and the power above, a higher power than him. Absalom doesn't care about the vertical power. He cares about horizontal power.
Power. Yeah, my power.
Yeah. Joanne, did I see you trying to say something? Or no?
Say something.
Sorry to
No.
call you out. I thought I saw your lips moving. I didn't know if you were trying to jump in.
Just meditating on what you're saying.
Okay. So yeah, Absalom he cares about what people think. He doesn't care about what God thinks. He cares about what people think. And he is, I would say, a very good manipulator. He cares about people, cares about what people think, and the power he can get through them. And so word gets back to David that Absalom is planning an attack. He's now coming for it. Yeah. David, what do you think of David's response to this? He hears that his son is coming. Jerusalem is a walled city that has a walled water supply. It is actually very resilient to attacks. All they have to do is shut down the city, and it's very hard to get into it. But David chooses instead to leave. He takes majority of the people with him. There's a lot of conversation of like, no, you stay behind. Oh, no, you want to come with me? Okay, come with me. And there's this sense of like panic. This is where, I'm sorry I couldn't do more research before we logged on today. There's a lot of people. I don't know who all of these people are and why certain people get different stay or leave categories. The important one to keep in mind, though, is that David takes his wives and his children with him, but that his 10 concubines are told to stay behind and take care of the palace. That's gonna come into play next week, that the ladies are told to stay behind. But David chooses to abandon the city and kind of revert back to old school David habits. Saul is attacking, I'm gonna go to a desert oasis. His son is attacking, he takes his entire court and goes to a desert oasis. He hides in the wilderness again.
And the ark.
Yeah, specifically, what happens with the ark? How do they use the ark? Because there's a strategy here once again.
Oh, they set down the ark of God until the people had passed out of the city, so they went by it to indicate where their allegiance ought to be, to remind them they're God's people.
So it's a good reminder. It's also a tool of safe passage. Remember, God is standing on the ark. So it's implied, I believe, that they cross a body of water with the ark there. So the people pass, God is theoretically protecting their escape. But David says, once they successfully escape, David tells them to take the Ark of the Covenant back to the tabernacle, bring it back to the city, put it where it belongs, put God in the city where God's supposed to be. Why would David want the Ark in the city? He kind of explains it here. Why send the Ark back to the city instead of having it as like a protective amulet while he's in the wilderness?
It indicates that the seat of power is still in Jerusalem, does it not?
Mhm.
Right. The seat of power is in Jerusalem because God's there.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And we talked a moment ago the difference between horizontal power and vertical power. So with God being in Jerusalem, how is God going, like, what is God's role if God is staying in Jerusalem?
Mhm.
Well, but this is also where David is climbing the Mount of Olives,
Mhm.
and that the Mount of Olives is where God was worshipped.
Mhm.
And he's weeping as he does this. I mean, it's almost like a sign of devotion and,
Mhm.
and
So I don't have, we're very low on time. So allow me 5 minutes to go through this, but just a quick word of geography. Jerusalem is kind of on a little bit of a mountain. It is not the tallest mountain in the area, but it is on a mountain. The water source is in the valley. So when you exit the city, you are walking downhill. At the moment that you start walking uphill, you're on the Mount of Olives. So the Mount of Olives can be eye to eye with the temple and with the palace. There's just a valley in between. So David has like exited the palace, walked down to the valley. And so as they're walking away across the Mount of Olives, they can see the city that they're leaving. And they can also probably see the approaching art. Or I don't know, it depends what direction. I didn't do the maps today. So they may or may not be able to see the approaching people. And so David is seeing, as he's walking away, he is eye to eye with the palace and his lifestyle, his seat on the throne. And when he tells the ark to go back, his comment is, if God wills it, I will come back to the city. If God does not will it, God, like, the path will not be there. So David is making the choice here. And this is, once again, this shows, while David retreating makes him look weak, it shows that his faith is strong, because he has always derived his power from God choosing him. And so by his retreat, he's basically saying, if this is my time to leave, I will do it gracefully. Part of me wonders if he saw Saul grip to power long after he had lost it and decided, I'm not going to do what Saul did. If I have to leave, if I have to give up my power, I am going to. I am not going to cause bloodshed on my son. I am not going to battle within my own family. I am going to leave peacefully. I'm going to take my people that I can protect with me. If God wants me back, God will take me back. If God doesn't want me back and the chosen one of God is now Absalom, so it's going to be. Yeah, Larry.
As General MacArthur said, I shall return.
So once again, this shows David's belief in the vertical power. While he is willing to do the court of public opinion to the best of his ability, he derives his power from God, and so God needs to stay and be the ultimate judge in the city. He wants Absalom to be next to God so God can judge Absalom. God is going to be witness to Absalom. Because that's the other thing. Remember, we have a geolocated God. God is standing on the Ark of the Covenant. So if God is going to judge Absalom, God needs to see Absalom. And so David is saying, like, ultimately, I am actually not the highest authority in the land. The highest authority in the land needs to be back where this regime is going to be. I'm going to go hide in the desert for a while. And we know David can do that. He's like, I've done this before. We're just going back to that. And that is more or less where David sends a spy back into one of the last conversation with the random person. David now has a spy in Absalom's court, so David can keep tabs on what's going on. So the situation is set up. What do we expect to come? Do we think things are going to go well?
No.
For
No.
David, for Absalom.
Conflict.
Mhm.
We've read the rest of the story.
Yeah. Did you all read ahead or
Yeah.
did you stop where I told you to stop?
Oh, yeah.
No.
We don't know the next chapter.
Absalom should have gotten a haircut.
Yeah, he should have. Poor Absalom.
I would say that I have never read this book before, the books of Samuel. I've never, in a parochial school studied that. I don't remember sermons on this. This is
Right.
like very new to me.
So why, with the few minutes remaining, we hear about David and Bathsheba, which
Mhm.
is in some ways, while I said last week was kind of the prelude to this week, David and Bathsheba actually was the inciting incident of this all. That's where we get the proclamation from Nathan, which is why we've read it at the beginning of every time. Why is this story not talked about, do you think? Because in some ways, this is a bigger episode in David's career than David. David and Bathsheba is one chapter, and not even the full chapter. This is now multi-chapters. Why don't we hear about this?
I think because we're so intent on getting Solomon to the throne and the greatness of Solomon. That's one idea I have, but it is kind of it's certainly not in everybody's Bible study, that's for sure.
Mhm.
It's kind of David's dirty laundry, and his first and second born sons, are a great disappointment.
Mhm.
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 Yeah, so we often talk about David in these lofty terms, and I feel like even to this point, well, because I have my perspective that I do, we've already brought David down a few rungs. David isn't so squeaky, shiny clean as Sunday school lessons often give. So we've already brought David down, and now we're airing his dirty laundry in his family politics.
Mhm. And
You know,
here
I don't go.
Saul was the person that we didn't respect. We didn't see as this glowing king and
Mhm.
glowing person. I thought David was. Now what we're hearing of David is
Mhm.
that we all knew about Absalom's beautiful hair.
And how long it was. Oh my gosh. Oh,
Mhm.
it is.
Yeah.
Well, it wouldn't have, it's not a story. I think the other part of it is, well, what's the good lesson in this for us? And I think a lot of biblical studies are, especially for children, are like, now this is how we should behave because look what happened and how good David was and God took care of him. And I mean, what's the moral of this story? I mean,
You could say no man is without value because he can always serve as a bad example.
bad example. Right, right, that's right. If it weren't for a bad example, there wouldn't be an example at all, or whatever.
Yeah, so this is really a point where we're getting messy royal stories, but I think that's part of it is there's not really a good takeaway. But that almost makes me sad that we only talk about the stories in the Bible that have good, neatly packaged with a bow takeaways. Um, which, for a sermon, like I really do try to have like a takeaway. After
Yeah.
every lesson, I really hope that you have like at least one nugget to take home with you and think about through the week. I know you all have asked me a few times, and there are some of these stories where it's like, I don't know what the nugget would be. This is a messy story about human people who are behaving horribly.
But in many ways, I think it starts to acknowledge human nature, and that, this is what man has to battle.
Mhm.
It's just right from the beginning, you're going to be tempted, you're going to be conniving, you're going so on, and it's really hard to keep the train on the tracks.
And it is, comforting is the wrong word, but there is something about seeing a politician do the same things, like what, 3,000 years ago that they're doing today, that it makes our modern problems seem not so modern.
Mhm.
And that's why it's important to read the messy parts, is to see that, in the words of Ecclesiastes that we will eventually read, there's nothing new under the sun. We
Yeah.
have different houses and different technologies, but people are people.
Mhm.
And so today was really a lesson in politics are messy, power is messy, and humans are gonna human all over the place. So
Mhm.
We have
this,
met the
But
enemy and he is us.
yeah, I think that's the part too, is it, why would you want to teach about this? This really doesn't even put God in a very good light.
No.
It, if God created such a good world, well, I don't see it, you
Yeah.
know?
Where is he?
Yeah.
yeah. Well, folks, I think that's enough for today. Wait, did I see a final hand for a final comment?
Well, just two little things that are bothering me here.
What's
One
up?
is that Absalom apparently had a daughter, Tamar, also.
Yeah.
I thought was kind of strange.
Yeah.
That
Why use
that was
this?
his sister's name that was raped, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
And the other little thing was that our Bible says it wasn't 4 years that he worked the crowd outside uh, the king. That was mine says 40 years.
40?
Outside
Wow.
the gates.
Yeah. And it came to pass after 40 years, Absalom said unto the king, I pray thee, let me go and pay
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
vow. Anyway,
All
but
right.
that just a little
Give me a sec. What's the chapter and verse number of that, of the 40
uh,
years?
chapter 15, verse 7.
Verse 7? Okay, let me look at the notes real quick.
Oh, yeah, mine says
Not that really
4.
matters, but I thought that makes them pretty old.
Oh, yeah. Well,
That was a text, evidently a text question, because mine has 4, but it says the Greek Syrian text says
oh,
Hebrew says 40.
Okay.
So
But
That
that makes it, you're right, that really makes it, that
makes it
makes all the
different.
difference, doesn't it,
Right,
work
'cause
in the
he's getting up
picture?
there in years. He's got to move if he wants to be king.
Yeah.
so here is when you always have the question of which version of the text is the accurate one. So for the um a quick try to keep this short, a quick explanation of what versions of the Hebrew text do we have? We have the Aleppo Codex, which most Bibles use as authoritative. The Aleppo Codex is a complete document that has all of the books. This is one that the Jewish tradition sees as authoritative. So the New Revised Standard Version also uses the Aleppo Codex in 95% of cases because it is the oldest complete copy. So you have the Aleppo Codex. The problem is that version of the Bible or of the Hebrew text is not that old. It is complete, but it is actually, in the grand scheme of things, fairly young. There is a Greek translation of the Hebrew text, and there's a Latin translate. If you and the Latin translation was often used as authoritative in the medieval church. That everything was translated, and then some English translations are a translation of the translation. That one is no longer seen as authoritative because it is a translation of a translation. So you have two levels of interpretation. And so most sources go directly to the Aleppo Codex. The one that throws a big cog in the wheel is the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are older than all of those ones and has some wild word choices that are very different. But because they are from a sect, they are not the text that was read in the temple. They are probably from a group that had extreme points of view. It is seen that it's not always seen as fully trustworthy because they had a very defined worldview and may have changed some things. So the Aleppo Codex seems to say 4. The Greek, which is older but is already a translation, says 40. My guess is it actually is 4. I tend to default to the Aleppo Codex. So that's a bunch of
before.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bunch of gobbledygook. It's always good to it's one of those hard things where not everyone wants to read about what source does your Bible use for its main translations.
But as I'm reading it, see, I was looking at it differently, that this guy is very mature. He's got to be in his 60s.
Yeah. Yeah.
My guess is he's still not young.
No.
And David is definitely not young at this point.
Well, and there are lots of places that we've run into where the Bible has been very loose with numbers.
Yeah.
You know, particularly with people's ages.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So the other argument I would say is if the actual translation is 40 years, 40 years is a shorthand to say a long time.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah,
you either have 4 years or a long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right, I've kept you way over. Thank you all for being having such a good conversation today. It's only gonna, I told you before, it only gets worse from here. Sorry. We are getting into some of the messiest parts of the Bible. So
I'm waiting for Abishag the Shumanite.
okay. That's not one that I know offhand.
That's in Kings. Well, that was one of Mac's favorite sermons as far as I was concerned. And I have a copy of it.
Okay. I'll see if I have that one in my file. I would be curious. Anyways, let us pray. Gracious and loving God, again, we come to a story of the messiness of humanity, and again, we see how people have handled power and influence in the past. Sometimes the people we read about are good examples that we want to emulate, and sometimes they are examples of the exact thing we don't want to do or don't want to say and don't want to be. Help us continue to look to you. As David seemed to always do, help us seek your counsel and your advice. Help us trust that things will work out even sometimes when we are not the ones who are turning the hand of justice, but help us make sure that we are electing leaders who are not just telling us what we want to hear, but are actually ruling with justice and compassion. So guide us in our world today. Guide our discernment and our language. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 All right.
Thanks, Chris. Everybody
Thanks, Chris.
have a good week.
Take care, everyone.